Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is October 5th. On this day in 2005, 27-year-old Christie Wilson walked out of the Thunder Valley Casino near Sacramento, California. It was 1:13 a.m., and cameras caught her leaving with a man she'd just met at the blackjack tables. But she didn't make it to her car. It sat untouched in the lot, and her phone was left behind. And from that moment on, Christie was gone. Within weeks, detectives focused in on that man she walked out with, Mario Garcia. A year later, he would be convicted of her murder even though her body was still missing. But for her family, there was only one question that mattered. Where was Christie? Today, we're talking about the abduction and murder of Christie Wilson. Let's get started. On October 4th, 2005, Christie Wilson drove out to Thunder Valley Casino, a sprawling, neon-lit complex north of Sacramento. She spent the evening at the blackjack tables, her face and movements captured by dozens of overhead security cameras. Around 1 a.m, those cameras recorded the moment that would become pivotal in this story. They showed Christie leaving with a man who'd she'd been talking to at the tables, 53-year-old Mario Garcia. He was older. He was also married with children and a familiar player in the casino. The footage shows Garcia trying to put an arm around Christie, but she pulls away. Minutes later, they disappear into the darkness of the parking lot. At 1:18 a.m., another camera picks up Garcia's car pulling out, seemingly with him alone inside. But Christie's car stayed parked at the casino, with her purse and her belongings inside. And back at the casino, detectives found something that made the situation even more alarming: her cell phone. She hadn't come back to get it. That detail, along with the untouched car, made it clear whatever had happened to Christie had happened fast. When Christie hadn't returned home by the next evening, her family began calling hospitals and checking jail rosters. Finally, they drove out to the casino themselves. When they saw Christie's car was still sitting there, a cold dread immediately set in. Now, a casino is probably one of the worst places you can choose to abduct someone. In addition to the billions of security cameras tracking your every move, the player's card that the casino gives you is also a treasure trove of information. Detectives were able to use Garcia's to confirm his presence at the tables with Christie that night. Then, when they searched his car, what they found told a violent story. There were tiny drops of blood on the interior door and the back seat. Strands of hair that had been ripped out by the root were embedded in the trunk liner and the door handle. Both the blood and the hair were later determined to be Christie's. Garcia insisted that Christie had never been in his vehicle, but the forensics were pretty damning. They didn't have a body, though, but nevertheless, the district attorney took on the difficult task of trying a no-body homicide. In fact, this was the very first one in Placer County. In September 2006, the trial began. Prosecutors laid out the timeline. Christie was last seen on camera leaving with Garcia. He had fresh scratches on his face and his chest the next day. And Christie's blood and hair were in his car. In January 2007, Mario Garcia was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 59 years to life. The verdict brought justice on paper, but for Christie's family, especially her mother, Debbie Boyd, the fight wasn't over. They still didn't have Christie. For nearly 15 years, Christie's case sat in that painful middle ground. They had secured a conviction, but they had no body to bury. Debbie Boyd never stopped searching. She led volunteer groups into fields and wooded areas. She followed every lead, no matter how faint. In 2015, when drought exposed human bones in Folsom Lake, Debbie called investigators right away. The remains weren't Christie's. It was just another false start. But behind the scenes, detectives kept circling back too. Two investigators, Don Murchison and Nuno Tavares, worked the case for years, re-examining Garcia's former property near Auburn. They suspected that Christie had been there all along, hidden somewhere on the land. Then in 2018, Garcia hinted that he wanted consideration for early release. Debbie was asked if she would negotiate with him, if she'd trade a lighter sentence for her daughter's body. Debbie admitted that she considered it, but ultimately she refused. Christie's remains weren't a bargaining chip, but then they got a break. In August 2020, acting on a fresh tip, detectives secured access to Garcia's old property. They brought in a private ground-penetrating radar team. In over 4 long days, they scanned nearly 5 acres. The first 2 digs turned up nothing, but on the third, Detective Tavares saw something pale in the dirt. A fragment. It was bone. The work stopped and a forensic archaeologist was brought in, and soon a skeleton emerged from the earth, largely intact and carefully buried. Dental records confirmed what everyone already knew in their hearts. It was Christie Wilson. The discovery of Christie in 2020 brought the case full circle. Christie had been on Garcia's property all along, buried just 100 yards from the house. Prosecutors' theory that Garcia killed her after leaving the casino and concealed her body in his home was vindicated 15 years later. Legally, the case had already been settled. Garcia's conviction had already been upheld on appeal in 2009. The California Supreme Court denied review. The system had spoken. But for Christie's family, it wasn't until 2020 that they could truly grieve. That December, Mario Garcia died in state prison, reportedly from pneumonia tied to COVID. He never confessed. He never said where she was, but in the end, the ground told them the truth that he refused to. Debbie Boyd, speaking after Christie's recovery, thanked the detectives who had refused to let the case go cold. She said she finally had the peace of knowing her daughter could be laid to rest. Christie's case is a rare kind of case, a no-body murder that became a body-backed recovery. A story where the evidence and the persistence of family and investigators eventually converged. For nearly 15 years, her mother searched, investigators dug, and the community remembered. And finally, Christie was brought home. She was loved, she was fought for, and in the end, she was found. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found Christie's story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It'll help us grow. And be sure to join me again tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!